Welcome to selfdiscoverymedia.com, where we discover the communities that are making a difference in the lives of others. Our self-discovery is something we are all making on our life's journey. Here you will find the people that will be your guidance, that will be your inspiration, that will be there for you in support on your journey of life. Do enjoy. Our next show is... Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of Their Story Matters right here on selfdiscoverymedia.com. I'm your host, Sarah Troy, and my guest today is James Kitfield, and he's written a book which I think is quite extraordinary, actually, because it's all about military heroes. It's in the company of heroes, and he's interviewed, I think it's 25 people about their service over in Afghanistan, the 20-year commitment over there. And, was it all in vain? Have the Taliban and ISIS, won? They won the Medal of Honor for the work that they did over there, but it must be rather disheartening for them to come back and just kind of see everything go back to the way it was before. So why did he write this book? Well, he's an award-winning military journalist, and he likes telling these stories of people who, the stories that count, the stories that you're not going to get on Fox News, the stories of the people that really are making a difference out there that nobody really speaks about. So let's get into this book, In the Company of Heroes, and all about what these guys have gone through and your whole passion to doing this in the first place. What was it about these particular stories that made you want to kind of share them?
I've covered these wars over the last 2 decades as a national security correspondent for a magazine called National Journal, which is based here in Washington, and really covered them from a sort of strategic 30,000-foot level, where I was spending time with generals and senior officers and trying to get their input for what their strategy was and was it working, et cetera. But I was always just really impressed by the young men and women in uniform who were at the front of the front lines, at the tip of the spear, if you will, and wanted to find a way to tell their stories. And, so I had to take my policy hat away and just look at the sort of human interest stories. And I got an opportunity to do that a few years ago when the Navy Department reached out and offered me an exclusive interview with a Navy SEAL named Britt Slavinsky. And did that interview and profiled him in a magazine, and just found his story and his team's story just so compelling. It was almost Homeric in the journey they took, the decisions they had to make. At almost every instance, they had a decision to make. They could have taken the easier way to the safer way out, but they took the hard way and put their lives in danger to save a comrade. And there was a huge human cost to that. But so it's a tragedy. It's tragic to the story, but there's also inspiration, I think. And having done that article, that profile, I wanted to tell more of these stories because I found them sort of capturing the essence of what the all-volunteer force has been doing for the last 20 years at the very tip of the spear.
We never get the real story, unfortunately, unless somebody is really willing to dive into it and really learn it. I have another genre here, our global veterans, and it's veterans I've interviewed, and it's not about, the glory of war. It's more about when they come back, the post-traumatic stress, the readjusting to life. And on the movies and on the video games, we see the heroes, right? And if somebody dies, the comrade dies, for the cause. And we don't see the human story behind it. We don't see the pain and the anguish that happens around it. We don't see the change that it brings about to, our soldiers that are out there fighting, because they cannot come back the same people as what they went. And if we actually understood the struggles, the pain, the suffering, the sacrifice, would we be so quick to send everyone out to war? Would we look for a different solution? I'm anti-war. Can we look to another solution before we dive into the arms? But I also do feel in a lot of ways, unless they come back a hero, they're dismissed. Nobody wants to really know about them. That kind of went back to the Vietnam War, where, it was a failed war in the books. And so nobody wanted to talk about it and nobody wanted to address the troubles. So telling the stories of actually what they went through, how it changed them, the sacrifices that they actually have made really does shed light on not the glory of war, which is what's promoted all the time, but really the horrors of what they have to go through.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, one thing that I was impressed by in researching this book and in talking to a number of these recipients of the Medal of Honor was their humility. A lot of them called this a great honor, but also a very weighty burden, because it reminds them of the worst day of their lives, as you talk about. Days when they lost friends, and days when some of their friends didn't come home, and some came back grievously wounded. And they don't come back the same. You're right. Almost to a person, they have struggled with post-traumatic stress issues. You cannot, and I hesitate to say disorder into that, because there's nothing disorderly about a human reaction to the horrors that they see firsthand. So, but I think they do it because they want to draw attention to their teammates, and that's where the humility comes in. Not one of them was sort of boisterous, or it was all about trying to bring attention to the heroism that surrounded them in these fights. And I found that very ennobling. And they've talked out very publicly about their problems with post-traumatic stress, because they know they're looked on as the bravest of the brave. So if they can admit they have those struggles and need to have therapy and need to talk to mental health officials, they're hoping other combat veterans who are struggling will seek out that help. And so there's something ennobling about that as well.
To admit that you have post-traumatic stress, to admit that you are having struggles. We look upon them as the heroes. We look upon them that nothing will have an effect on them. And it's so far from the truth. How many of them come back without some sort of, post-traumatic stress? And what I have absolutely loved of the ones I've interviewed is they saw a need, but they didn't see the need being met. So they created the platform to help other veterans. And, they're kind of still fighting their war, quite essentially when they come back, because they're not the same person, adjusting to life now, the triggers that are constantly going on, and the replay that is there. It isn't that they just come back, and we saw this in World War II. My father was a squadron leader in World War II, and when he came out of the war, I think there were maybe 3 of his squadron left. And one of them just sat down one day and said, "I'm tired," and passed away. My dad was dead at 45 of a heart attack, because it was, the war is over now, suck it up and get on with life. And nobody dealt with the trauma. And there isn't anybody that comes back from war without a trauma base to it. And it needs to be spoken about.
Absolutely, and that's why these Medal of Honor recipients are so out front. And I mean, some of them, like just one comes to mind when I was listening to you. Flo Groberg, who I interviewed, won the Medal of Honor by he was in Afghanistan, and they were on a patrol. He was in charge of security detail. A suicide bomber approaches, and he rushes the guy, tackles him, and blocks the unit from the blast, but he's grievously injured and is in the hospital, and literally survivor's guilt, combined with all the drugs they were, inducing hallucinations because to take away the pain, it was driving him mad. And it was actually another patient who was in Walter Reed, who came in and had multiple amputations of his limbs, who said, I know you're having a bad day, and there's a lot of people in this hospital having a bad day, and I need for you to try to find your warrior spirit. And that saved Flo Groberg's life. And he is now this really amazing entrepreneur. But it was driving, survivor's guilt is extremely, extremely acute for a lot of these men. So a lot of the courage that takes place in these stories takes place away from the battlefield, actually.
It's a totally different war they're fighting, isn't it? It's a totally different form of survival. And the thing is, there aren't any of the rules and the regulations to do with it. When they're on the front, they're trained, they're in tuned, to be, what is unexpected coming up, they're constantly alert. And then when they come back, that alertness all the time can drive them mad. And so it's, how do you, take people who come back from war, limbs missing? One of the gentlemen interviewed, Bobby Henline, was in a Humvee, all of his comrades killed. He was burnt to his whole head and lost half an arm. And he went on to become a comedian. That was his way of healing himself and his way of kind of, healing. But he says, I totally admit I have post-traumatic stress. I have those days where those demons come out of me, but they have to find an outlet, don't they? They have to find something that they can put their energy and their direction into as part of their healing. And it's not always available for them. In a lot of ways, they have to create it themselves or be inspired by somebody else who's doing it.
Yeah, there was a Medal of Honor recipient named, I think he still is the youngest recipient from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Is a Corporal William Kyle Carpenter, a Marine. He's one of a number of these soldiers or Marines who jumped on a grenade just to save his buddy, and it was a miracle he survived.
Yeah.
But he was so grievously wounded that no one thought he would live. More than 40 surgeries to stitch him back together, bone and flesh, and just an excruciating period of rehabilitation and operations constantly. Lost an eye, lost a limb, a lot of scars. And instead of coming out of that experience embittered, he came out as this. He used it to sort of find meaning in his life and to bring honor onto all the teams of doctors who spent 2 years trying to save him, and became this motivational speaker, goes to colleges and schools and talks to just an amazing young man. And I was just astounded that he found, even though this was just a horrific event, and he also had terrible survivor's guilt and hallucinations that almost drove him crazy. But he came through it, and he embraced it. And this new role in his life is to help people sort of live each day for what it's worth. And he became kind of a warrior philosopher, and at a very young age. And has a website, I think it's called Chicks Dig Scars. Went back to college. He just has been an incredible guy, and he was not unlike a lot of these people who just find inspiration somehow in the most horrible things that could happen to you. And yeah, it's inspiring.
We are inclined through our everyday to find something to moan about, right? And, we bitch about this and we bitch about that. And then you meet somebody who's gone through, horrors that we couldn't even possibly think about. And we look at who they are today. Now, some of them may have limbs missing. And so you can see the physical scars, right? But it's those that don't have anything missing, but it's inside. And we don't see the emotional scars. And another show I did on the homeless and how many of our veterans end up on the street, addiction or, certainly some emotional problems, mistrust is one. And I find it extremely sad that when they come home, that there isn't a flood of something to help people kind of navigate the way back to some form of normalcy. They're never going to go back to the way they are, but to find a purpose, because really what they're looking for is a purpose again, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think, yeah, so you mentioned Vietnam, and I've written a lot about Vietnam and profiled people who were in that war, who then rose to the ranks, became generals and fought the Persian Gulf War. And they had it really rough because we made the mistake as a society in the Vietnam War to conflate an unpopular war with the people that we sent to fight it. And so they came back and people, called them baby killers and disparaged their uniform, etc. We didn't make that mistake with these wars. As a society, these people are always told, we appreciate your service. We look at the U.S. military as the most admired and respected institution in the United States by far. So they didn't have that problem. But one thing in doing these stories and previous stories was it's very disorienting for them to come back from Iraq or Afghanistan over the last 20 years and find a country that's not really at war. And so they've been fighting, experiencing these horrors, and they come back and the comment made is, we went to war, America went to the mall. And that's just, it shows that there's a disorienting aspect of the fact that you come back and no one, you arrive you come back on a plane, you go right to a base, and you don't even see people for a while. And when you do, they don't consider themselves at war. They had kind of that's one of the problems of having such long wars, is they had been tuned out by the
Yes.
American public, but these guys and women come back and they're extremely traumatized by these wars. And so that's disorienting in its own right. So that's a certain aspect of these wars, and it has to do with, we have an all volunteer military now, and it's a very small percentage. It's a small force that had to go back again and again and again to combat deployments because it was small. So less than 1% of the population bore the burdens of these America's longest wars. And there's all kinds of studies that have been done that each time you go back to a combat deployment, you're more likely to face post-traumatic stress issues. Much more strain on families, constant strain when you're going through that. Many people, first marriages were, divorce was an epidemic in one of these, at some stages of these wars. So it's been very tough on the all volunteer force. Having said that, they've performed remarkably resilient force.
Well, I mean, this is what I say, the veterans that I've interviewed on our global veterans stories is, like one guy came back divorced, having had a couple of divorces before he met his next wife. And they realized, he realized he was coming back and trying to run his family as he would if he was on the front, right? And it's like, and the wife would say, hey, hang on. I've been head of the family while you've been gone. You can't kind of come in and start changing everything. But he couldn't get out of his mold, and she couldn't accept that. So they started a whole platform for couples to retreat, to talk about it, to get to know each other on a new level, because each time they come back, there's a different layer of them, of to who they are or what they're going through, and a way of being able to work through it. And this is what's really, really needed. You're not the same person I married. No, you can't go away to war and come back and be the same one. And as he said, the longest war, if it's World War II or what, everybody's in it. And so when you're coming home or got leave or anything, the war is still going on, or everybody's been on the same battlefront. Here it's news over there, right? Not here. You've got political war going on here. And so it's like, well, I don't want to hear about your story. It's, I don't know how to respond to it. I don't know how to react to it. And that's a disservice to them, because we should be listening to them. And we should be there helping them in any which way that we can, and value who they are now, or who they are in their own self-discovery of who they are now.
Yeah. One of the Medal of Honor recipients, Dakota Meyer, another young enlisted Marine, he lost his whole team. They wiped out in this battle in Afghanistan. And he was so traumatized by survivor's guilt, he actually tried to commit suicide. He wrote a book about this, and actually put a gun to his head and pulled the trigger, and only because some loved one thought ahead and took out the bullets that were in the gun in his car, that he survived. And that was an epiphany for him, that he's not going to go down that road anymore. He's going to live for the people he wears on a bracelet, the names of the people who lost in that battle. Because I think his comment was, they would give all their days for one day. So I'm not gonna throw away my life. But it's very compelling story about how really crushing this survivor's guilt is for many of these people.
Yeah. But also, I think also the addiction. I had one guy, unfortunately, we couldn't air the show due to a different circumstance, but his story stayed with me, because he was talking about his addiction. He would keep signing up and going back because he was so used to being there in that moment. He didn't know how to come back and decompress. And a friend of his one day said, "Hey, you're coming to do yoga with me." "I don't do yoga. I'm going back, signing up to the front." And the friend made him do it. And he ended up creating this yoga for veteran families, for the soldiers that come back, where the families all go to yoga together, so they can all kind of decompress and come out on the same time. And this is now something that's been going on around the world. You never know what it is that's going to decompress you or put you on the right track. But, as I said, I see it's the veterans that are out there for the veterans, that understand what they're going through and are creating these platforms that are helping them.
And these Medal of Honor recipients, they're all members of the Medal of Honor Society, the world's most exclusive fraternity. And they do annual events where they bring them all together, and they go out and speak at schools, but they also, speak to veterans groups. So they are a great emissaries for everything we're talking about, and they take that role very seriously. It's something else I was impressed by, and I'm also impressed by the Gold Star families who I spoke with, of Medal of Honor recipients who didn't make it back and received the award posthumously. And there's quite a number of those, and the courage of the families to put their lives back together after losing someone so cherished is itself an amazing story of courage, and difficult. And they would talk to me because they want to bring attention again to not only their son, but their lost loved one, but to his teammates.
Yeah.
And a lot of those teammates, they all show up at the funeral and etc. And they see them, and these parents see the survivor's guilt in their lost son's friends, and they go out of their way to try to alleviate that, and try to tell them, look, God had a plan for him, and he's where he needs to be now, and he did what he needed to do. But it's hard, and so that's another case where a lot of the courage reflected in these stories takes place away from a battlefield, but it's ennobling.
Yeah, I mean, by sharing those stories, it's kind of giving them an insight to what the loved ones are going through, whether it's their children or spouse. And it's, because otherwise the horror plays around in their mind, right? And, by kind of sharing that story, oh gosh, what is that wonderful movie of the one guy that was he was a medical person, and he went down there and he wouldn't go, right? He stayed there until the end, and it cost him his life. And that commitment to be there for your brothers and sisters, that commitment to try and get everyone home, and if they don't, make sure that their life or their death wasn't in vain, and to bring some comfort to the families. And for the families, it does, right? It makes their lives feel like it wasn't senseless. They didn't die in vain. And that's something I think that every person who loses somebody wants to know, that it wasn't an in vain death.
Certainly not in vain. And of course, with the way things have gone so badly in Afghanistan, I'm afraid I'm hearing a lot of this from people, both active duty and retired veterans who are asking those questions. And my comment to them is, no, it was not in vain. Your service, I was in Washington on 9/11. I was a national correspondent, security correspondent for National Journal when the Pentagon was hit, and when National Journal was, blocks away from that happening. And every counterterrorism expert I talked to, and I talked to scores of them over the next few years, trying to understand this conflict we were in, said we're going to get hit. It's inevitable. We're going to get hit by a lot more 9/11s. There's just no question about it. They've identified a soft underbelly, and they're going to press their case. And that didn't happen. And it didn't happen because we sent these brave servicemen and women over there to fight them in their home lairs. So we sent them to Afghanistan. We decimated Al Qaeda. I mean, the 20 top people, including Osama bin Laden, who were his lieutenants in Al Qaeda, are almost gone to a person. Totally gone. Decimated the ranks of Al Qaeda in Iraq. It took some years, but we killed their leader, Zarqawi, Abu Musab Zarqawi, and decimated their leadership. And then when ISIS raised its head, we decimated them as well. And because we kept pressure on those groups, they weren't able to plot and meticulously plan and train and deploy teams and cells. So that's why we haven't been hit again, and it's because these service members took the fight to them. And so I always remind people that certainly was not, their service was not in vain.
Right. Do you feel that right now they must be frustrated in knowing that the Taliban are back in, ISIS are back in, because they've had to retreat? Do they feel like we shouldn't have left, or their own country should have fought more? I mean, what do you think is the consensus amongst them now with what's going on?
Oh, I think it's been as it's been described to me by a four-star general, it's been a gut punch.
Yeah.
It's been a gut punch to everyone who served over there. They and I apologize for the ringing. it's a worst case scenario to see the Taliban of all people, you know, have the blood of hundreds of American service members on their hands, and tens of thousands of Afghan civilians. To have them sweep in behind is just the worst case scenario. And it is a gut punch. It's heart wrenching for people who expended blood, sweat, tears, and lost friends in that fight. So it's a difficult time for them. And I've already, you know, seen reports from psychiatrists who are dealing with people having issues because of that. You know, it's got an existential question, and it gets to this: was it in vain? It wasn't, but it's hard to see those things happen when you fought them for 20 years. And I think the military believes they could have kept them at bay if they had not been pulled out of there. So they got pulled out of the fight that they didn't want to leave particularly. And yeah, it's just hard. It's, you know, everyone understands that. And the leadership has gone to great pains to admit that they understand that that's very tough to view. You know, the military leadership right now, almost all of them have led in combat in Afghanistan. So they are feeling it too. So they get it. But it's just the hardest thing to see the Taliban sweep back in. That's a horror show.
Yeah, you know, you always hope that the impact is going to change things. And you did see changes while they were there, and, you know, really good change. And you think, oh, great, you know, you're kind of giving the country the power it needs to set itself right, you know, to step up and empower itself. And then all of a sudden you just see the government and the military just put everything down and come on in Taliban. And it had to have been like almost a spit in the face, you know, to everybody that's been there trying to help this country, you know, because yes, initially it was out for, you know, I kind of a reaction to 9/11 and a prevention. And then it seemed to become about strengthening its own country, its own people, so that the Taliban and the ISIS wouldn't get into power again. And then it's just like, you know, the soldiers are retreating, in comes the Taliban, there comes the ISIS. And it's like, you know, what happened to the people that have been there, that have been trained, that have been supported? Why did they just lay everything down and give up?
I mean, the books will be written about this, but you know, we built a force that, you know, and it's proven over the last decade, the Afghans would fight. They fought and died in the many thousands, many more thousands than us or our allies. And they were leading the fight in the front lines in the last 5-6 years. But they were very reliant on U.S. air power. I mean, there's just no way to go about it. And so when we say train and assist, we have built these intelligence networks that are very good at finding the enemy, fixing the enemy, targeting the enemy, learning from that experience and finding more of them. And I've written about that too. And that's just not something that you can transport to a pretty rudimentary military that you've only stood up for 20 years. I mean, we're 200 years into our building our institutions that support our military. So it was Ambassador Crocker, who was one of the great ambassadors during these wars, both in Iraq and Afghanistan, made the point that we've lost some strategic patience in this country. The military thought that they had it down to a sustainable level, maybe 8,000 Americans, same number of NATO troops. We've proven that we could use that as a liaison force to bring air power and logistics and the things that we bought that only we can bring. But the forever war narrative took hold, and you know, the American public wanted out, and you know, we have two presidents who agree on nothing else, but that they both agree we wanted our forces out of Afghanistan. So, you know, it's found the military argument more compelling because they warned that, you know, something like what's happened would happen, and it's pretty awful, and it's going to have repercussions for years. And and so I'm put me on the side of those who thinks that we have faith with those who serve more by finding the patience to. Again, we weren't on the front lines fighting in Afghanistan for recent years. We had very few casualties, more casualties in training accidents than we had in Afghanistan combat, because we were in the background doing the things that we can do. And we did the same thing with the Islamic State too, by the way. I mean, that's how we defeated them. We used the Kurdish Defense Forces and the Iraqi security forces, and we brought the special things that we can bring from the air. That worked, and I think the military was hoping that they would be able to keep doing that model in Afghanistan. But politicians made the decision that's not going to happen, so it didn't happen.
Do you feel that there is any fear of a 9/11 happening again now? Do you think they have enough power, or do you think that we've got kind of Big Brother and security in place that can't happen again?
Well, no, I mean, it's certainly possible. We're much better defended. We are, our defenses are much stronger today than they were, and our intelligence networks are much more robust. But, Al-Qaeda is already back in Afghanistan. We know that to be a fact. And the intelligence community just came out and said within 2 years, they'll probably reconstitute.
Yeah.
Will they start plotting training bases, plotting attacks on the West, on us and our allies? It's certainly possible. I mean, we pulled out of Iraq in 2011 against the advice of our own generals who said it was premature. And sure enough, we were back in 2014 and ISIS was in control of a third of Syria and a third of Iraq and on the gates of Baghdad. So could that happen in Afghanistan? You bet it could. If Al-Qaeda reconstitutes and then launches an attack on the West that is, a major terrorist spectacular, all bets are off.
Do you think it's kind of in the human nature, that no matter how much you help them, how much you show them a better future, how much you show them, that life can be different, that, it's that proverbial rubber band, it's going to snap back to the way it was, I mean, it's all very well being they're kind of defending and all of that, but if that mentality of the Taliban is just so utterly entrenched, it's kind of, you need to get into their way of thinking and dismantle the thinking, which is a totally different strategy altogether, isn't it?
Well, and so 2 points there. I mean, the Taliban were never popular with the populace. They were, the polls, we polled ad infinitum while we were there in the last 20 years, and they never polled into double digits. They're not, because everyone remembered what they were like when they were ruling the country in the late 1990s. And so that's one thing. So a lot of Afghans bought into what we were trying to do. Now, having said that, the Taliban, you're not going to change their thinking. They're raised from little children in these radical Islamic madrasas funded by the Saudis, all in Pakistan's tribal regions. And all they learn is this medieval 7th century interpretation of Sharia law and Islam. And so they're ideological fanatics, the Taliban. There's no question about that. And in that sense, that's why they won't break ties with Al-Qaeda, because they're fellow travelers and their ideology. So you had to defeat them, and you couldn't defeat them as long as they had sanctuaries right across the border in Pakistan. So then it became a sort of mowing the grass management issue of keeping them from getting too powerful. And we succeeded at that for 20 years, but we lost, as I said, patience for doing that. But that was, it was never going to be the kind of fight where you sign a surrender agreement on the deck of a battleship. It was going to be manage this threat until at such time the Afghan forces or they reached a political settlement. And quite honestly, neither of those things were right along the horizon. They were some ways down the road.
Out of your heroes that you've interviewed, yes, they go around and they do public speaks or anything, but have any of them kind of stepped into a different level of intelligence or have strategy or, anything along that, or have they kind of walked away from military service altogether?
Well, a few of them are still in the fight. Navy SEAL Edward Byers, they don't like the word won, so received his Medal of Honor, earned it, received it, but not won. And he had the ceremony in the White House and went right back into the Navy SEALs, and is still there as far as I know. Same with Army Ranger Patrick Payne, who received his Medal of Honor for going into an ISIS prison where they were going to execute 80 prisoners in the coming days. They were digging the graves. And he and his teammates assaulted the prison, and he went into the burning prison 3 times under machine gun fire to rescue the hostages, these Kurdish hostages they had. And he went right back to being a ranger. So it runs the gamut. Some of them come, Paul Carpenter became a motivational speaker. Flo Groberg became an entrepreneur. It kind of runs the gamut. Well, some of them just say, okay, good, I'm going to move on. Some of them re-up, and some of them just keep fighting. It just all depends on, the individual, really.
Yeah. I mean, for some people, that fight, that heroism is who they are. It is their entire genetics of who they are, and whether they would be going back to the front or becoming a cop or doing something else, that's who they are, putting themselves on the front line. And you can't take that away from them because it is exactly who they are. And some of them, as like this other guy who was a junkie to the adrenaline, he realized he was, and so he no longer went back. But for some, as you said, the courage to go into a burning building under fire to rescue people, that is not something that is taught. Maybe the strategy, but that is not something you just decide to do. I'm going to get a medal for this. This is something that compels you from the heart, from the soul, that is way bigger than you. And you can't breed those kind of people. They are, a treasure. They're unique.
That's exactly right. And one of the more inspiring things for me was kind of unexpected is that each of these 25 individuals come from every corner of America. They come from big cities in the Northeast and small towns in the Mountain West and all over the South and in the Northwest. Every corner of America, there are communities and families who are creating these extraordinary individuals with extraordinary values of selflessness and self-sacrifice. And I found that to be, especially in these hyper-partisan times when we look at each other frequently across the political divide and, see an opponent or an enemy. It was nice to me to see that the communities all across this country, whatever politics they embrace, are creating these really extraordinary individuals. And I found that to be ennobling and in some ways optimistic. I also note that the military is the least political institution in America. These people, as described to me by David Belavia and other recipients, said, I don't care if your father left you $1 million or who you love or what ethnicity you are or who you pray to, as long as you're willing to get shot for me and my buddy, you're my buddy. So I think there's something that we can learn from these people who, they are a team of Americans at the most essence of teamwork, and they're all pushing in the same direction, and they don't ask each other, are you a Democrat or a Republican or this or that? You're just, are you a member of my team willing to put your life at risk for mine? And if so, I'll do the same for you. And that's a good lesson for this country in that.
Yeah. Yes. Again, some of the people I've interviewed, that. For them, it's like a buddy is, in need of protection, and, their life being on the line to save that buddy is not even, a thought, it's an action, right? And it's, they are even more than the family, because they're so reliant on each other to have each other's back, to look out for each other, to support one another. And it's not like, well, let me think about it. It's trigger. It's now. It's this second, And so you need to know that you can trust people that can be in that moment, because they very, very much live in the now, don't they?
Yeah, there's no time to, these decisions have been made in their own minds well before the actual action taken. If I see a grenade, would I jump? They've thought through that.
Yeah.
The story that launched me on this, Britt Slavinsky, he's a SEAL team leader, goes to be inserted on top of a snowy mountaintop in the Hindu Kush at night. Helicopters ambushed, barely makes it out of the ambush zone by these Al-Qaeda fighters who are entrenched on the mountaintop. But one of their comrades, Neil Roberts, another SEAL, falls out of the back of the helicopter as it's trying to get out of the ambush zone. Helicopter crash lands a mile away. They survive that barely, get taken back to base, and they have to make a decision. Britt Slavinsky is in charge of the team, 5-man team. It's like, to go back up there would be a suicide mission, fighting uphill in snow drifts against a larger force. There's no way, but Neil Roberts, the SEAL who fell out, is still up there. What am I going to do?
Right.
And they all to a person say, let's go get him. and they get shot up badly. One Air Force combat controller gets shot, presumed dead. Another SEAL is shot and nearly has his leg shot off. Have to get down the mountain, retreat down the mountain. Turns out horrifically that John Chapman, the Air Force combat controller, was not dead. He kind of wakes up, a drone catches his action later, and he fights up on that hillside for 15 minutes till his ammunition is all but spent. Quick reaction force, a helicopter comes in, he gets out of his, enclosed fighting position and exposes himself to try to give cover to the helicopter coming in and gets killed. And that's one of the rare cases where you had two Medal of Honor recipients for the same battle, Britt Slavinsky, the SEAL team leader, and John Chapman, the combat controller. But every time in that story, they could have done the easy or the safe thing. They chose the hard and the selfless thing. And it's just an incredible, these are incredible people. They're just incredible examples.
The Musketeers, all for one, one for all.
Yeah.
You have to have that. It's you see this in the military and on the forefront, but it's also when you see it, that same mentality, if they bring it back, you see you've got one that's a successful entrepreneur, but you bring back that same mentality, we're all in this. I may be the owner or the CEO, but every single person working here, it's all for one and one for all, because it's only as a team. And that's the thing, they really know how to work as a team, and they know how to delegate, and they know how to see people's strengths, and they know, how to utilize that and know how to do it on a quick moment as well. So that transferable skills can be absolutely, incredible in any other field that they want to take into.
Yeah. Something team building is the military's secret sauce. It's what they do better than any other organization, I think, in the world. And the people who are promoted in the military are people who are not, the Hollywood image of a drill sergeant shouting in his faces. They're people who nurture other soldiers and show that they consider their troops above their own self. And those are the people who get promoted in the military, and certainly comes through very strongly in these stories. There's another young Green Beret, Robbie Miller. He was the youngest man in his Green Beret A team there at a snowy forest at night in the Afghan Hindu Kush Mountains, doing bomb damage assessment. The whole unit's surrounded and ambushed, and his captain gets shot through the neck, and very seriously wounded. So he charges into the teeth of this ambush at night to give his comrades a chance to retreat. And they hear him fighting for another 15, 20 minutes by himself out there fighting multiple machine gun nests and Taliban encampments. And he's throwing grenades, he's fighting, they heard him fight on and on. And finally he gets killed. And which is really sad. And they almost lose other men trying to come out to get his body, but they weren't going to leave it behind. So it's just, the sacrifices they make for each other are astounding, but somehow inspiring too.
Yeah. They interviewed a guy who wrote the story about the young man Bigelow, the American sniper. They did a movie on it. He was in the story, apparently not completely accurate, but he became blind, completely blind, but he wanted to climb Kilimanjaro, and he wasn't going to let it stop him. And so this other guy climbed with him and, wrote a book on him being so inspired by his outlook on life and the fact that, he can't see, but he's still got everything else. And unfortunately, he died on the operating table when they were doing some sort of operation for him, and he didn't make it. But he was such an inspiration to this other guy of like, I may not be able to see, but I've got all the other faculties and I'm still going to do. And that is such an inspiration to other people. I've come back with, kind of reminds me of the Monty Python skit of the soldier, the arm falls off, the leg falls off, and he's still going to protect the river, and you find out it's just a little stream. But it's like if I can still keep going, I'm going to still keep going, right? And
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, they are extraordinary individuals.
Mhm. And, we don't talk. I mean, yes, there are movies on it, and we watch the movie, and, I mean, Saving Private Ryan, that first 20-minute scene of them landing on the beach, I think left everybody speechless. You couldn't help but be aghast because it was 20 minutes of bombardment of, one person or the other being blown up, and that was the reality of what they were going through. And it didn't matter how skilled you were. If that bullet or that bomb was going to get you, it was going to get you if you're in the wrong place, right? So we don't realize how much they're placing their life, however skilled they are, to chance of being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Absolutely. And there's probably 4 or 5 stories of this from what I call the mountain campaign in Afghanistan, where we put often very, small units in very remote valleys where they've never even seen the people in the next valley, much less an American soldier, and tried to plug all the routes that the Taliban and Al Qaeda were using to infiltrate from Pakistan into Afghanistan. And that was some of the most horrific fighting, because they were often these little fish bowls surrounded by these massive mountains. These mountain fighters knew the mountains better than they did. There's probably 5 or 6 stories like that, including one, Cop Keating, which they've made documentaries about, which was almost overrun. Just remarkable. That was another battle where two soldiers received the Medal of Honor for that battle. But that was that was an infantry on infantry, face to face, bloody fighting, as bad as anything I've ever heard about. And that was awful. Also, David Belavia, fought in the Battle of Fallujah, which was the most intense urban combat we've seen since the Tet Offensive in 1968 in Vietnam. So, people don't realize, I don't think, what we asked these service members, these volunteers, to do. But it was some intense fighting over the last 20 years.
And none of them consider themselves heroes, do they?
No, they're really humble that way, and I guess the humility comes from what they've witnessed. But so they've witnessed a lot of valor, so they don't like to be singled out, because they know that without the valor of their teammates, they wouldn't have survived.
Right.
So no, they're not. They're very humble, almost to a person that I met. Very humble, which is, you don't understand until you hear what they go through, and the how much they put into the value of their comrades. So that for them to sort of feel like they deserve it, I think they would think that would be a betrayal of the people who watch their backs and have their backs. So no, very, very, very humble.
Yeah. And there's probably always going to be a war somewhere, because it's human nature, unfortunately. I would love people to give love a chance and find a way of resolving things without the gun, or without war. But I think we're far off that. But, if we are sending our young ones to war, I want it to be a war that has a meaning behind it. And that is in defense of, because we are asking these people to put their lives on the line, and whether they come back alive or not, they're never going to come back the same. And there is always going to be some sort of trauma that's going to be within them. And we need to be supportive of that. And we also need to be mindful, before we let them go in the first place.
Yeah, I profiled the last commander in Afghanistan, and we were talking about this, and he goes, because they're obviously being asked the "was it worth it" question.
Yeah.
As we pull out and the Taliban are gaining strength, they didn't anticipate that the Afghan security forces would fold like a house of cards, but they knew it was a possibility. And he goes, and this is came from special forces, fought in just about every battle of the last 20 years, and also in the Battle of Mogadishu in the 1990s. And his comment was, well, I always come back to, we're here defending the homeland. And that's what they were there. They were defending the homeland. And that was a rallying cry that everyone understood. They understood why we were we were where we were, and they should be proud that for 2 decades they did defend the homeland against
Right.
any terrorist spectaculars, and they can take extraordinary pride in that, I think.
I want to quickly talk about your other books as well, because you've written 3 other books, The Twilight Warriors, The Soldier Spies and Special Agents Who Are Revolutionary of American Way of War. And what other books have you done? And also, can you show us your book right now and tell us how we can get hold of all of these books?
You can get the books at any place the hardback books are sold, as well as just order it and have it delivered to your doorstep on Amazon. Unfortunately, the book I have right here doesn't have a cover on it, so it's not going to be good for that. I've written 4 books. This is my 4th. The first one, Prodigal Soldiers, told the story of that I kind of referenced, of the Persian Gulf War, which was so successful, so quickly devastating to the Iraqi forces. We kicked out of Kuwait, and traced the experiences of all the top commanders back. They were almost to a person, had cut their teeth, if you will, in Vietnam. So they took those lessons and with them, for 20 years before the Persian Gulf War. So that was Prodigal Soldiers. War and Destiny was about the Iraq War, the run up to the Iraq War, and which I and many others have come to believe was a strategic blunder of just historic proportions. Well, it's why the opportunity cost we lost in Afghanistan because we shifted to Iraq is partly why we can explain what happened this last few months. Twilight Warriors was looked very closely at this model of counterterrorism operations that has been so successful at finding all the leaders of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, of ISIS. It's this, they call it find, fix, finish, exploit, and analyze cycle of operations that started in special forces that really use globe spanning networks of intelligence gathering with special forces raids that built a knowledge base of patterns of life for all of these terrorists, and became the greatest manhunting machine the world's ever seen. And it helped keep us safe, and it's one of the great reasons why we decimated the top ranks of these organizations, because we hunted these people down and found them. They're not easy to find. They don't wear uniforms. They don't hide in plain sight. They typically are deeply underground. And so I wanted to tell that story because I think that's, especially now that we're out of Afghanistan, we'll be relying very heavily on that network, that ability to find, fix, finish, and exploit the intelligence from these individuals who are trying to do us harm. So that was Twilight Warriors, and then this book, obviously, my coda to these conflicts was the bravest of the brave of the all-volunteer force, but also indicative and reflective of the all-volunteer force.
Right. And so I know that all they need to do is just put in your name in Amazon, James Kitfield, and all of your books will come up there so they can find there. You have a website that people can find you?
Well, I'm a senior fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. So CSPC is the acronym. So if you put that in, you'll see my website where my bio is and a lot of my work I'm still doing.
So did you choose this line of work, or was it chosen for you?
I stumbled into it, honestly. I went to journalism school, always planned to be a journalist. Just the military thing, a job came available and I wanted a correspondent in Washington. I had interned in Washington. I loved the environment as a journalist because it's famous saying you can throw a typewriter and hit 20 stories in Washington, D.C. But the cover in the military was something that was kind of a fluke. I just kind of fell into it and enjoyed it, and found it a fascinating beat beyond. I expanded it to the intelligence beat and also to the foreign policy beat. So I covered Pentagon, State, CIA, and just found that pretty interesting work. So I kept at it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's actually a part of our own self-discovery, is that things we fall into if we allow, and then you just go with the flow and see where it happens. And with all your your soldiers and your veterans, they may have started off one way, but what happens because of that journey. Even the struggles and the adversity that they go through, it ends up becoming their survival or the platform, or what they're doing next ends up being an inspiration or an answer to someone else, right? So everything we do in life always leads us to a different purpose.
My old friend Joe Galloway, who we lost in the last month, one of the great war correspondents of all times, used to call the military and the media the control freaks and the anarchists. And there's some truth to that, but what's interesting about the military and the media is we both feel a very strong calling. It's almost like a priesthood. If you're journalists, we believe, First Amendment, we are doing something absolutely essential to democracy, and soldiers feel the same way. And so there's a gulf between us, but also some recognition, I think. And I found that fascinating in dealing with the military for so many years.
And, I think quite honestly, we see so much fake news out there today, and, the kind of the Fox News syndrome, take a pimple and make it into a volcanic eruption. We need good journalism. We need people who are really telling the story from the root up, not the sensationalism. And, we're inclined to see the sensationalism, which I think kind of numbs us. It's a disservice, because we're not truly actually feeling or understanding what people are going through for us. So, we need the good journalists that are going to tell those stories, and we need to read them, folks. We need to listen to them because we not only learn about what other people are doing for us, but I think we also learn a great deal about ourselves along the way.
Absolutely. And it's I worry a lot about misinformation and social media, and it's not been a net plus as far as I'm concerned. And I think we need to find an equilibrium where if you prefer Fox News, at least turn CNN on occasionally, or one of the network news shows, or if you want to watch something, New York Times, look at the Wall Street Journal occasionally and see what the other half is reading. Because if we just stay in our own echo chambers, it's going to lead where we are right now, which is where we don't see much common ground anymore, and that's a dangerous thing for our democracy.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't want to glorify war, but we want to understand the people that do go to war for us, the sacrifice that they're making. Even if they don't come back injured, they come back changed. And you cannot go to war, to the front, or even in any of the other services that you're doing. You may not be up on the front. You may be part of the food or supplies or machinery or whatever. You can't go there without having a ripple effect on it changing your life. And we need to be more, have more empathy and more understanding, more patience and more compassion, for our veterans, because we don't know what they've gone through. And, it's not just the soldiers that suffer from post-traumatic stress. There are many people that are on the forefront. Right now, we're looking at our nurses and our doctors with this pandemic. So many of them are going through, because they've been through their own war zone and seen far too much death themselves. So I think, let's put away the fake news right now and step up with a little more compassion and understanding, and be willing to learn what the real story is before we look just the titillation and the sensation up there. So thank you for writing your books and for telling us and sharing these stories, and for sharing it here today.
No, thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, folks, please know the real truth of what really is going on before you kind of make a judgment or, make a statement, because we do not know what people go through for us. And when we do, we step far more into an appreciation and understanding. Until next time, bye for now. We hope that you enjoyed the show. You will hear many, many shows here on selfdiscoverymedia.com. We have new shows for you out every week. Just find them on our podcast or What's New. If you feel that you have something to share that makes a difference in the lives of others, or you too feel that you could be a host, please contact me at info@selfdiscoverymedia.com, and we will be glad to speak with you. Have a wonderful day.